I remember the first time I went to a grocery store to buy yeast. I'm thinking to myself, I'm just going to walk to the baking aisle, grab a bottle of yeast. But then I get to the aisle, and to my dismay, there were so many options to pick from. There's instant yeast, rapid rise yeast, active dry yeast, and they had some in packets and they had some in jars. If you've ever been in a situation where you wanted to buy yeast and didn't know which one to get, or maybe you have active dry yeast and the recipe you're using calls for instant yeast, and you're wondering if you can substitute one with the other, then this video is for you. Hi guys, my name is Susie and I recently started learning how to make my own bread. I ran into a few challenges recently and I almost gave up baking. But then I started reading more about the science of bread making and I decided to share what I've learned so far in a series called Knowledge Sharing. This video will have timestamps so you can skip to a section you're interested in. As a disclaimer, this is what I found from research and experimenting. If there's anything I say that you disagree with, leave a comment below and let's have a discussion. I'm hoping to learn from you guys as well. I'll have all of my references in the description box below. So let's jump right into it. Yeast is a single-cell organism that is pretty much everywhere. You have yeast in your house, in the air, in your hair, everywhere. There are so many different species and types of yeast, but since this is a baking channel, the yeast I'm going to be talking about is baker's yeast. And just like all living organisms, yeast needs certain conditions in order for it to thrive. Yeast is essential in bread making because it helps with the texture and the flavor of the bread. When you knead dough and let it prove, enzymes break down the carbohydrates into sugar. The yeast then eats the sugar and grows and multiplies and releases carbon dioxide and alcohol. The carbon dioxide release is what causes the bread to rise, and the alcohol gives the bread flavor. If you didn't knead your dough adequately, it wouldn't have enough strength to hold in the carbon dioxide. This could cause your dough to deflate or rise unevenly. Baker's yeast can be broken up into two categories: fresh and dry yeast. Fresh yeast, just like the name, is alive and needs to be used within a certain period of time or it will go bad. You can make your own fresh yeast at home by combining water and whole wheat in a bowl. Some of the yeast in your house will make its way into the bowl and will fit in the sugar and will grow and multiply. You'll know this is working when you see bubbles in the container. This is how sourdough starter is made. There are other types of fresh yeast like biga, Polish, and sponges, which require a small amount of yeast. Fresh yeast can be stored in the fridge to extend its shelf life. Dry yeast is usually what you get from the grocery store, and there are two types of dry yeast: active dry yeast and instant or rapid rise yeast. The production of dry yeast yields granules of yeast with the outer layer that is killed during the processing, which protects the dormant yeast in the center. The only difference between active and instant yeast is the size of the granules. Active dry yeast has larger granules, while instant yeast is ground into finer granules. This is usually why it is recommended to proof active dry yeast before using. This is to make sure that the dormant yeast in the center is still viable. During proofing, the outer layer is broken down to reveal the dormant yeast in the center, and after it feeds on the sugar, it releases carbon dioxide, which is why it foams up during proofing. Instant yeast, on the other hand, doesn't need as much time to dissolve the outer layer since the granules are so small. That's why we usually add it directly to the other ingredients without proofing first. But I recently learned that you don't need to proof active dry yeast as long as it's not close to expiration date, and I tried it the other day and it worked. Just add it directly to the other ingredients. Because the granules of active dry yeast and instant yeast are not the same size, you can't substitute them one for one. Active dry yeast has larger granules, so you need less of instant yeast if substituting instant yeast for active dry yeast. If a recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of active dry yeast, substitute with 3/4 teaspoons of instant yeast. And if a recipe calls for instant yeast, substitute with 1 1/4 teaspoons of active dry yeast. so you don't need to own both active dry and instant yeast. If you have an unopened bottle of yeast, you can keep it in room temperature, but after you open it, store it in the fridge or in the freezer to keep longer. Hope you guys found this video informative. If you did and would like to learn more about baking with me, please like and subscribe for more videos. The next video in this series will be how to get consistent results when baking every time. So I hope you guys stick around for that. There'll be an icon up here if it's live, so you can click on the icon to watch it. Leave any questions you have in the comments below, and thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys!